Good afternoon, guys. Good afternoon. Tommy Stiggs here. I'm doing a little pre-record. I'm new to this, trying this out. I want to see if this works. I think you might enjoy this. This is about the mob genre, mafia related. It's about Joe Pagliarulo, who's a famous podcaster, very, very eloquent. The way he delivers, he's got a nice way about him. Joe Pags, known as Joe Pags. He does a sit-down with Rudy Giuliani and Michael Franzese. It's the first time in history something like this will never probably happen again. It's the first time in history something like this is happening. So I wanted to bring it to you guys. I'm having a nice glass of wine, a little Pinot Grigio, and I'm going to do a little screen sharing. I'm not editing any of this. If I mess it up, it's going to be what it's going to be. I am an amateur. But I thought it might be interesting, and hopefully I don't get a strike on this. I'm not sure how any of this stuff works. Like I said, this is maybe my it's my first real go-around, but it's my third shot at doing a pre-record and upload it as a premiere. This will be pre-recorded, guys. You won't be seeing me live. You will be seeing me live in the chat when I do upload this video. So let's give it a shot. Let's see what we can do here. See if I can make this situation work. Present. Share the screen. And I'm getting right into it. Let's see if we can make it happen, okay? Let's go right with this right here. Share with audio. And let's get right to it.
Thanks a lot for stopping by. Look, this is an historic interview for my money because these two guys, the last time they saw each other, and I think the last time they said a syllable to each other was about 37 years ago in a court in New York, in the Southern District of New York. It is Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor, the former U.S. attorney from the Southern District, also a former associate attorney general for Ronald Reagan. Wow. And we all know Rudy Giuliani. He's the guy. And also Michael Franzese, the former defendant in that case, a former Capo regime for the Colombo crime family in New York. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming together on this.
So,
thank you. Thanks for having us, guys.
It's almost like the start of a joke. Three Italian guys sit down for an interview. You know what I mean? So it's interesting because I interview both of you a lot, and I like both of you a lot, and I think that your stories are amazing. And Rudy, I was telling Michael this before we even started today. The reason why this came together and why this is happening is that I brought him up to you, and you said, "How's he doing?" Instead of saying that SOB, instead of saying that piece of garbage, you said, "How's he doing today?" You know, I believe in redemption. Fill me in on that if you don't mind. Let's start from that, and we'll go back to the 1980s.
First of all,
so it's interesting. You know, one's a cop, one's a robber. Although Michael Franzese never really talks about his cooperation. He doesn't seem to think it's real because I think he said nobody went away because of his cooperation. I'm not sure about that. Let's dig into it a little bit. Let's see what Mayor Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor, has to say. Let's see what goes on here.
Having prosecuted so many cases, they never were. I know it sounds strange, but they never were personal. They were all professional
business.
Some of the people I prosecuted, whether they were organized crime or white collar crime, or some of them were nice people who just happened to be involved in that awful kind of business.
Yeah.
Some of them were horrible people. There was no reason ever to get personal unless they did something personal to me. And second, I watched Michael's transformation from afar, read about it.
What's the transformation?
When somebody says something like that, you always wonder, is it, I'm going to turn my back on it. I'm going to reform. I'm going to change. Half the time it's true.
A transformation, I guess you can say. He's not calling him a rat. He decided to cooperate. That's how he got out of the life. It's not really a transformation where he was given a blessing. He turned state's evidence. Let's see how it goes. Let's check it out. Let's go in a little bit more here, okay?
Time it's not true.
Right.
And so you have to have a little skepticism. You never have to give up hope. And then when I saw over a period of years that this is real, I was very impressed because it's a hard thing to do. It doesn't matter if we're talking about putting aside the mafia or putting aside insider trading or putting aside the people you pay bribes with or whatever the hell the crime is.
Right.
it's hard to put that, to change your personality so you're not impelled to do it. I mean, how many people did I put in jail? And, a year later, they're back doing the same thing.
Right. But when I interviewed Rudy, Michael, I showed you the video.
Okay. Are you really changed? So what changed you? You still have your mischievous ways. That's very, very difficult to change the personality within an individual. I'll tell you from experience, it's like fighting an addiction every day, not being involved in life changing. He says he found God. He doesn't really say it in here, but be that as it may, let's go ahead with a little bit here. Let's keep on rolling.
Because I asked Rudy, hey, have you got a message for him? And I showed it to you, and you genuinely seemed surprised.
Hi, everyone. It's Claudia. Visit Bucks County's local tours. My favorite dessert is ice cream. And lucky for...
Well, I was, but, I do remember, too, back when, I did walk away from the life and things were starting to change for me. A lot of law enforcement people kind of weighed in on it, and they said they didn't believe it, and I was pulling the wool over the government's eyes. But you may not remember this, but they asked you, and it's in an interview, and you said, I believe it might be sincere. Michael's a...
What is she saying? Okay, I'm going to go through the interview because I do think it is interesting. Pull the wool over their eyes. He testified. What pull the wool? He didn't say to the government he walked away. He got a pass. He walked away because he cooperated. So pull the wool over their eyes would be a different way of walking away from it, saying, I'm just done. I'm done with the life. This is a little bit different because he cooperated. What's there to pull the wool over their eyes? He cooperated. Let's continue here. Let's go right along here.
A fairly smart guy. He knows what's going on, and I think it might be sincere. So even way back then, you had something nice to say, and that I really appreciated that back then.
Well, what blows? Go ahead.
And I was exactly, that's exactly right. I mean, exactly what I'm saying now. When somebody, first of all, it's unusual for somebody to really say something like that. And you said it in a more powerful way than a lot of people say it. But again, to be acting. But there's also no reason to cut off the possibility. I mean, it does happen. It does. I mean, I know people going way back before Michael, because I'm so darn old. There were drug addicts and even drug dealers who got out of jail, got over it, and they had very, very good lives and families. And then I know people who wasted their lives away. So,
well, you said a line to me, Rudy. You said, I believe in redemption. And it's not that I didn't think that you did. I've been a fan of yours for a long time, and we've been friends now for several years. I feel like you believe in the goodness in people, but as the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District, possibly and probably the most important district in the country, do you believe in redemption as you're trying him, or you worry about that later?
You worry about it later.
I mean,
you worry about it later.
Right.
During the investigation and the trial, it's all single-minded, right? You've got to catch the person. Sometimes you'll pick up vibrations about them that tell you they're really terrible people, or they're not. I mean, with mafia people, I would listen to a lot of tapes, and I could kind of tell the ones who liked committing murder and the ones who didn't.
Right.
Now, that's not much of a distinction for the person who gets killed, but it does tell you a little something about the person.
Yeah.
And I could tell the insider traders who really enjoyed the game of just being a cheat. And then those who did it because they were desperate and needed money, or they were too embarrassed to say they were losing money.
All right,
it was almost ego more than criminality. So you get to know people. But when you're convicted, you can't start thinking about redeeming.
Absolutely. Well, when you're in the courtroom, you want to win. Michael, when you're in the courtroom, you want to win. And in this one, you did. And we'll get into that in a bit. But when you're sitting across the way from Rudy Giuliani, he's your enemy. He's the guy that you want to beat in court. What's the mindset from your table, from the defendant's table?
Well, back then especially, I had a whole different, view of law enforcement. You got to understand, Joe, I grew up, with my dad, who was a very high profile figure. I love my dad. He was my idol growing up. And all I ever saw was law enforcement coming after him, what we considered harassing our family. My dad used to put things into my head about law enforcement, so I grew up hating
Not
law
really
enforcement. So they were my enemy almost from birth.
Violence, obviously.
And so when I'm sitting across the defense table, I'm not liking anybody. I don't want to like them, in any way. I just want to beat them. I want to do everything that's possible. And that's the mentality that most of us had, maybe for different reasons. A lot of guys that grew up on the street, they just didn't like law enforcement because they were street guys.
There's no different reasons. When you're involved in organized crime, the reason is they are the enemy. There's no different reasons. You just want to win and beat the government.
Guys, so you're always trying to win, and at whatever cost, believe me.
It's michaelfranzese.com. That's his website, michaelfranzese.com. Rudy'sCommonSense.com. Go there, an incredible podcast and vodcast that Rudy puts on every day. It's Rudy Giuliani and Michael Franzese. An historic conversation. I'm glad that we're doing it. Let's go in the way back machine. You're both from Brooklyn, New York.
Okay, so
you're both Italian-American, right?
So not many know this about Rudy's pop. So Rudy's pop was involved in criminal activity. They're probably going to say it right here, but Rudy's father was, either a bank robber or an armed robber. I'm not sure. Look, guys, I'm going through this with you. I watched it before with my mother. Now I'm watching it with you guys. Hopefully you're enjoying this, and hopefully they let this pass through and I don't get a strike on this. But let's see if Rudy says about his pop. But I know his pop was a criminal. His pop was a criminal.
You both grow up where your father is the dominant figure. Mine was too, Mario Pagliarulo. And we look up to them and we try to either emulate them or we try to learn from them. And you both sort of had the same vision. But Rudy, you decided your dad had made some mistakes and you would go a different way. Michael, you said, I want to be like my dad. Rudy, let me start with you. Am I right in how I characterized that? You looked at your dad and said, this is what I should do?
Right. I'll tell you, I lived in Brooklyn in Flatbush for 7 years. My father had gone to prison before I was born for armed robbery. Wow. He was running a bar and restaurant, then later pizza place. And he decided somewhere when I was about 5 or 6 that he had to get me out of Brooklyn because I had an older cousin who I admired very much and who was already beginning to get into trouble. And he said, no, I got to get you out of here. He told my mother that. I didn't know this until years later.
Right.
So he took me out of Brooklyn, and then I ended up in the suburbs. I ended up in Garden City South in North Belmore, and then I got a scholarship.
So you can very well be a product of environment, and Rudy's father absolutely saw that can happen to him. God bless him, the father, for doing that. That's not typical. It's very common for the next generation to follow in the footsteps. Remember, boys, kids do what we do, not as we say. So had he kept him in the environment, he may have gone a totally different way, maybe the way of his cousin. It's hard to say, but Rudy's father chose to get out of the neighborhood and woke up and said, I cannot do this. This is not a way of life that I want to live. Look, getting out of the neighborhood and getting into a different element is one thing. Rudy went the extreme. He went to the full extreme and started and prosecuted guys from the neighborhood. But let's listen. This is very good, very interesting.
To high school.
Very good,
and I think, but for that, I could be Michael, or maybe a lot worse.
Yes. That's an interesting. By the way, my grandfather was the fire chief in Belmore, New York. Just to let you know the circle that we're in.
Wow.
Belmore. Yeah, Don Mealy.
8 years.
Yeah. So Michael, what about that? Did you know that Rudy's dad had that past and that he very easily probably could have been you?
No, not really. The thing that I remember with Rudy, and I don't know, Rudy, I'd love to know if this is true or not, that you read the book that Joe Bonanno had wrote, and that you were really incensed about that book, the way he, categorized the mafia, which, by the way, a lot of guys on the street felt the same way. We
did speak about this on Lee Cole's show the other night. Joe Bonanno's book. All right, so they're going to touch on Joe Bonanno's book. I did explain in the show that I was on with Lee about Joe Bonanno giving Rudy the chart. Let's let's listen in. Let's see how this goes here.
Thought it was ridiculous that he wrote a book like that. And
I'll tell you what happened, Michael. I was the Associate Attorney General, and I asked my boss and the president if they could demote me to being U.S. Attorney in Manhattan because it was my dream job. I had been an assistant there. And while I was preparing to become U.S. Attorney, I got briefed on all the cases that were going on. The FBI had a whole bunch of organized crime cases, but they were here and there, and they were all over the place. And then I read Joe Bonanno's book, which is an extremely arrogant book about how he really is like the head of state. And the commission is really like part of the UN. It's like the UN. It's all garbage. But in it, he did a complete outline of when the commission began back in the late 20s or 30s, who ran it then. And then he did a line of succession that broke off about 12 years early. Now, I had helped to write the RICO statute with Professor Blakey. And the minute I saw that, I said, thank you, Joe. You just gave me half of a RICO case. You just proved to me you're in the business.
Wow. We had talks about this on many shows. Can you imagine? Joe Bonanno gave them, based on what Rudy is saying, he gave them everything up until a few years prior to this coming to fruition, I guess you could say. And Rudy had to pick it up from there, but he gave him the building blocks for the commission case. Let's check in. Let's see a little more here.
Of crime. So to simplify RICO, that's what RICO is. So if you go commit one robbery and it's a conspiracy, it's a conspiracy. You do one drug deal. But if you are in the business of robbing banks with the same people over and over, or in the business of selling drugs, or in the business of extorting people, it's a RICO violation. Well, he just laid it all out.
Oh, God.
Now, he thought he was smart because it was all beyond the statute of limitations, but he never read the RICO statute. The RICO statute doesn't have a statute of limitations.
For those who are watching, I just want to let people know, RICO is Racketeer Influenced and Corruption Organizations Act. And that act had been around for about 10 years, as I read it, Rudy, before you actually learned how to utilize it, because nobody really used it yet. Michael, if you don't mind, what were the families saying when Bonanno put the...
So RICO wasn't used up until a certain time, and I guess until Rudy implemented it. Before that, and during that, conspiracy was used quite often. So if you got caught in a bookmaking case, it's typically conspiracy. Now, if they want to, now that's on the state level, because RICO is a federal level. So if you're getting pinched on a state level, you're typically going to get conspiracy. Conspiracy is both. Now, I can be wrong. I'm not a perfectionist. I'm not perfect at any of this, and I say this many, many times. This is an observation or an opinion based on experience. So I think that on the state level, there's not RICO, obviously. RICO is a federal on the federal level. So if a guy gets pinched for bookmaking in the Bronx or Brooklyn or Newark or Belleville, New Jersey, it's going to typically be a single charge, at most a conspiracy charge, which would take you up to about 5 years on the first bookmaking charge. Let's continue here.
Book out. I mean, he basically, as Rudy said, just telegraphed for law enforcement, here's what we're doing, here's how we're doing it, and screw you, you can't do anything about it. How did the family react?
Well, I'll tell you what they said, and this is a little bit before my time, but, Joe Bonanno was on the hit list. He was supposed to get killed. And they sent him out, because he was a boss, they sent him out to Arizona and just said, keep quiet and don't bother us and stay away from us. And they gave him his life. And all I ever heard is, we made a mistake. This guy put us on blast, by writing a stupid book like this. Everybody was upset about it. Okay. And then, of course, Rudy just filled it in. He picked it up and started to run with the RICO Act. So it's even worse than we thought, what that book would cause. So, yeah, people were very upset with him about it. That's all.
All right, that's very interesting. So instead of killing Joe Bonanno, they basically shelved him. But good thing for Joe Bonanno, he was not a nickel and dime street guy trying to break parking meters. He was, I guess you can say, conservative mafioso, where he saved money, he had money, he maybe had legitimate investments, but he was able to go down to Arizona, not care about being shelved, and water his garden. That's basically what he did, but he was very smart. I guess he was smart with money, saved, didn't have a mansion. If you see Joe Bonanno's house in Arizona, it was very modest, very humble. So he can do that. He can take being shelved. I guess that is what Michael is saying. He was probably shelved. I don't know. That's what it sounds like.
That's all I ever heard. Nothing but negative stuff.
Rudy, I know that you helped write RICO. And again, it's Rudy Giuliani, Rudy's Common Sense. Go to his website, rudyscommonsense.com. Also an amazing talk show hosted, of course, America's Mayor. And Michael Franzese, michaelfranzese.com. Go there, become part of his crew. He's a born-again Christian. He's a pastor, and he's a former copper regime with the Colombo crime family. So Rudy, RICO is on the books. You helped write it, but nobody utilized it the correct way. Going in, I guess the Bonanno book certainly gave you the outline, but going in, did you already know that you were going to try to use RICO when you got the job in the Southern District?
The minute I read that, there's a section in his book with 4 chapters. And the name of the subsection is The Commission. And in it is a chart in which he lays out the original 5 families and then the succession of those 5 families down to, I believe, 1968. I looked at it and I said, now my job is to take it to 1981.
Right.
Or 82 or 83, whenever that was 83.
Right, 83.
But you gave me already
the indictments,
the corporate papers. You gave me the corporate organization.
Wow.
Which it's hard sometimes to get a jury to understand this is a business of crime. But Bonanno's book explained this was a business that was so highly sophisticated. They didn't want to have trouble with each other, so they set up this commission structure so that they could try as much as possible to work out their differences without killing each other. It was, in fact, a very intelligent thing to do, but it directly violated the racketeering influence corrupt organization statute, which allows you to put in all kinds of evidence.
Yeah, well, it also violated the rules of the street. Never mind the rules of the court. It violated the rules of the street. How this guy did not get clipped, I don't understand. Why did he get such a pass? He destroyed everything. Now, they could say John Gotti destroyed the mafia. Can you guys see this? Joe Bonanno started this disastrous downfall of the mafia. Now, I think this case came to light. I think Rudy picked this up in 83. I do think the indictments came down in late 83 or 84. Because Big Paul got clipped in 85 while the commission case was going. So I think they got pinched in 84. Let's listen. I'm just adding a little bit of thoughts. Sorry about that.
You couldn't otherwise put in. So then I went to the FBI and the Justice Department, where I had been number 3, and I said, please give me 20 agents. I want half of them to be counterintelligence agents, the guys who go after the communists, because they know how to break in better.
Right.
And basically, we broke into everybody's house, car. We broke into Fat Tony Salerno's social club on Pleasant Avenue. We broke into a car. We broke into.
You basically bugged the entire mob. You bugged everybody.
Yeah, I can tell you. I didn't use FBI agents couldn't have done that.
Now, Michael, were you aware of that?
These guys who for 30 years were doing it to the communists.
Were you guys aware that they were actually actively doing this? And after Bonanno's book, and after you saw what Giuliani was trying to do, did you guys adjust, or was there so much arrogance in the families that they said, we're not going to change, they can't get us?
Okay, well, we found out afterwards that they had broken into Sally Avellino and Tony Ducks, who was the boss at that time, at his car. And I know the evidence was very damaging there. Also, the Costa store at the restaurant where Jerry Langella used to hang out and hold court. I think a lot of the commission information came off of those bugs. So we found out afterwards. And Joe, the answer to that, no, the guys never adjusted. And the conversation just kept going on, and, more informants started to happen, and, more surveillance was put out there. And we just heard horrible things all the time. We heard it in the Gotti case. I mean, there was 2,000 hours of tapes on Gotti, and they were all bad. Him and a couple of the other guys. So, I always say that part of the reason for the mob's demise at that era was that nobody adjusted. They really didn't. I mean, law enforcement was so far ahead of us at that point in time. And the RICO thing hit everybody by surprise. It was very hard to defend, as Rudy knows. It was a tough statute to defend. And, it just got us all. I mean, I don't know how many people went down.
I want to make sure that I outline it the correct way, and I'm sorry for interrupting. It's Michael Franzese. He's on one coast. It's Rudy Giuliani. He's on the other coast. I'm in between. I'm in Texas. And we're really glad to have this sit down. Three Italian guys talking about stuff. Rudy, had they not been so arrogant, had you not had the yuppie Don, and I don't think you like that name, Michael, but that's what they called you, a guy who was making millions of dollars. If you didn't have John Gotti, a guy who was flashy as could be, Teflon Don, you didn't have Bonanno writing a freaking book, did you have as much of a chance of prosecuting? Did their arrogance crank you up and get you going in the morning?
I don't know that it did that. It sure gave me a lot of opportunities to get evidence that I otherwise wouldn't get.
So you kind of liked that they were you liked that they were flashy. You liked that they were flashy.
This is incredible. I mean, hopefully this video goes through, but this is incredible. Joe Pags just delivers it in a certain way. He's such a professional podcaster. That's how you do a show. Now, I don't have all them bells and whistles, all that fancy equipment. You see how crystal clear his voice is? Guys, I hope I'm not wasting my time here, and this isn't even going to go through, but I'm doing it. I'm trying to give you some nice content here.
Handed me the theory of the case on a silver platter.
Yeah.
So that's very unusual. I mean, I did RICO cases against Michael Milken and Boesky, and I had to really work hard to put together all that background evidence. So he gave me the background evidence. That made it easier. He gave me a plan, just take each one of those families from 68, just do the line of succession.
Right.
Take it from 68 to now. And let's get it on tape as much as we can. The best tape that I always thought, the two best tapes were Fat Tony, because he had a great sense of humor, and Matty Iannello, because that was a video and audio. And Matty's tape was, we broke into his office in Manhattan, where I can't remember if it was a Tuesday or Wednesday.
That's Matty the Horse Iannello. Matthew Iannello. He owned Umberto's in Little Italy, where Joey Gallo was shot. Let's continue.
Wednesday night, he would hold court, and the court was to adjudicate the disputes between the private carders.
Garbage.
I mean, the mob controlled private carding in New York, northern New Jersey, and a lot of Westchester.
Right.
And it involved a lot of hits, a lot of killing, a lot of disputes, people getting angry at each other, moving on each other's routes. Again, intelligently, they trusted Matty, and Matty would resolve the disputes. And it was fascinating to listen to. It was like listening to a courtroom.
So you actually liked it. I mean,
Judy.
I came in with a different perspective. You actually liked it because they were handing it to you on a platter. Michael, in retrospect, obviously the arrogance is what brought them down. I mean, that's obvious.
Oh, there's no doubt about that.
But while it was going, Michael, while that was happening, were you guys going, hey, pipe down a little bit? Or were you like, hey, it's cool, I'm in Forbes magazine. Hey, look at me, I've got a brand new flashy car and a new suit. Was anybody recognizing what was happening around them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, a lot of forget Gotti for a second, but a lot of the old timers, even Fat Tony, I mean, everybody was getting nervous. They wanted everybody to be low key, but it was too late at that point. I mean, who knows how much surveillance had been collected, how many tapes.
It's hard to be low key when you're used to a certain way of doing business, which means once a week you meet at the social club. It's very hard to change. How do you adapt? It's very difficult for the old timers, especially, to adapt. Now, if the old timers conferred with the young guys, they may have had a way to change some of the ways they were doing things, but the damage was basically done.
They were at that point in time. It was just too late because these indictments started coming down like boom, boom, one after another. I remember I was in MDC, on the Eastern District case, actually. And there was a trial every week, an indictment every week, another person locked up who was turning informant. It just happened so fast within that 3 or 4 year period. The indictments were just rolling out. So we didn't have time, really.
Rudy, I saw a quote from the early 1980s, probably 83 or 84, where you said of Michael Franzese, I think you called him Franzese. I think you pronounced it more Italian than we do now. But you said this Michael Franzese, obviously he's taken after his father. How big a deal was Sonny Franzese as far as taking the mob down? How big a deal was he for you guys in law enforcement to get? And then did that in turn make you look at Michael and his brother John and everybody else?
Sure, because, until you find out different, you think the family passes it down. Although there are examples of the opposite happening.
Right.
But you have to assume in law enforcement that that's not the case.
Right.
And Sonny, his father, was one of the major figures particularly in Brooklyn, but in organized crime in general. I mean, there are certain people that are more respected than others, maybe more feared or more respected, one or the other. And he was one of them. He was considered one of the most significant people, in Brooklyn. You had Colombo way back, you had Gallo. Remember their wars.
Well, Sonny probably would have been a boss had he not been locked up. Right? He was in succession. He probably would take the family over.
But he had sort of the standing of a boss anyway, even when he wasn't. He was seen as a very, very influential and tough guy. If you were in law enforcement and you caught him, that'd be a real big deal.
Michael, did you know the weight that your father carried around? Did you know that he was going to be a target at all times?
Yeah, I grew up with it, so I knew it. I'll tell you how I was surprised that we were caught on this. I had just come back from, I landed in a private airport. I had a jet at that time, and I got off the plane, and the agents were waiting for me to lock me up. So they locked me up. They get me in the car, and I said to them, by the way, guys, where are we going? And they said, we're going to Manhattan. And I said, what are we doing in Manhattan? The Eastern District is in Brooklyn. I thought they were locking me up on that case. And they said, no, Rudy Giuliani indicted you on this big racketeering case. I said, about what? I didn't even know what it was about at that time. I said, explain it to me. I really had. I said, you guys must.
From what I understand, Rudy was a Southern District. Eastern District was Brooklyn, and they indicted him in Manhattan and Southern District, I believe. Let's see.
They made a mistake. Doesn't make sense. And I'll tell you, I took it to another level. I went in and sat down with, I think Bruce Baird was one of the prosecutors, Bruce Baird and Aaron Marcoux.
He was. He absolutely got great memory.
Yeah, and I went in against the advice of my attorney, John Jacobs. He said, I don't want you to do this. I said, John, this has got to be a mistake. I have nothing to do with Manhattan and the Southern District. I want to go in and tell them before they indict me because they locked me up on an information. So I sat down with Bruce Baird and I said, tell me what this case is about because I think you made a mistake. I couldn't talk my way out of it. I got indicted, obviously, but that's how caught by surprise I was until, I started to see what the case was all about.
And we'll talk about you riding through New York City after Rudy was the mayor in a little while because you've got quite a story to tell there. It's Michael Franzese, michaelfranzese.com. Go there, become part of his crew. He's got a huge YouTube following, over 500,000 now. Rudy's comment.
The boss.
At what point did you say to yourself, this guy is making money hand over fist and he's doing something wrong? We got to focus on him now. And when it comes to Rico, this sounds like a 5-part question, but this is very interesting to me. With Rico, the soldier does something on the street and you can take down the boss because of it. So does the capo regime, the captain like Michael was, does he still raise a bigger red flag? Or now you're watching everybody like a hawk because you could take the family down no matter what anybody does?
Well, although the soldier on the street can incriminate the boss, you really need a connection, a little closer connection if you're going to want to get a conviction.
Okay.
So the capo regime becomes very important because the way it works is the captain is going to be closer to the people on the street. So he's going to be directly responsible for what they're doing.
So that's conspiracy.
And then he's going to pass that responsibility on to the boss. So it really is the way they function the way a business would function, a well-organized business. At least the good families did. The good meaning the better organized families.
Right.
There was a lot of discipline. Everybody knew their role. It was easy to put them on a chart because they knew where they belonged.
So you brought him up. You brought him in for racketeering, and he was stunned by that. So it was a very good job of you guys, surreptitiously gathering information. How close the case did you think it was?
See, because Michael thought he was being charged with a crime on his turf, but Rico is collective. So he thought he was being charged with something in Eastern in Brooklyn, not the Southern in Manhattan. Manhattan is the hub. So he thought it was a mistake because he didn't probably know what's going on with this Rico thing. I'm assuming. That's what it looks like to me anyway.
And was this about the gasoline stuff?
I don't remember any one case, but most of them came out of recordings.
Okay.
A few of them came out of witnesses, that you had to really worry about your witnesses, because the witnesses, I mean, I had witnesses we put on the stand who committed 13 murders.
Right.
We had a witness that Michael will probably remember, who chopped up 49 bodies. And he testified. He was the main witness against Catalano. It was a disaster. When they cross-examined him for 2 weeks, and not only did he chop up the bodies, he was kind of proud of the work that he did.
There was a moment.
I think I wanted to put him somewhere when he did that.
Right.
Everything goes right, by the way.
There are
on either side.
There are moments in our lives, and there's for those who are watching and listening, there's a bit of a Skype delay. I don't mean to talk over anybody. It's Rudy Giuliani, the honorable former mayor, America's mayor, my good friend, Michael Franzese, michaelfranzese.com, former cop of regime, the Colombo crime family. We've also become very good friends. And this conversation is one that I think is pretty historic. But there are details in our lives that we remember. I can remember a moment when I was 7 years old, somebody said something. Maybe you guys remember something when you're 15, or there's always a moment in life. Michael remembers a moment in the courtroom that, Rudy, I'm not so sure you do. But Sonny Franzese, for those who are watching and listening, was sentenced to half a century in jail, in prison. And Michael, you say that Rudy told you something. And Rudy, I don't know if you remember this, because I brought it up with you once before.
Sonny? We're talking about
No, his dad got half a century, but then you said something to Michael when you were trying him. And Michael, if you don't mind, relate that to my audience, what you remember Rudy saying to you.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Rudy, I saw you in the courtroom only one time. I don't think you ever visited. Maybe I wasn't paying attention if you were in the back or whatever. But there was one time when, and this is the only time I saw you there, when Aaron Marcoux, I think, and Baird, you were talking to them. John Jacobs was representing me, and a little conversation came back, and
John said something to you, and you turned back and said, you know, Franzese can get double what his father got on this case, 100 years. And then you kind of walked by me, and it was kind of stunning. I don't know if you remember that.
You said you were going to put him away for 100 years, Rudy.
yes.
I could very well have said that. I can't remember, but it would be the kind of thing I would say. Yeah, kind of thing I would do.
I'm glad you don't remember it, Rudy. It wasn't a good moment.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't a friendly moment for you. That's for sure, Michael. So, let me ask you about that specific case, because you say you don't remember the exact details of every case. Obviously, you had a bunch of people working for you, but there was a star witness that you were arguing with the Eastern District about, and it was Michael's partner, Iorizzo. And this guy, Rizzo, Eastern District wanted him. They didn't want to give him up. You wanted him, and you were Rudy Giuliani, for God's sake, so you ended up getting him. But the defense tore this guy apart. Do you remember that, first of all? And in retrospect, maybe leave him in the Eastern District and don't bring him over? Maybe you would have had a better chance with Michael?
I mean, we make some mistakes. There's no question we make some mistakes like that. I was actually telling you the one that I did remember, Vito Arena.
Yeah.
In the Castellano case.
Eastern is...
he had very, very...
From what I understand, Eastern is Brooklyn business. Brooklyn business, and Southern is Manhattan, which is the hub. So they wanted to keep this witness in Eastern. I don't know what happened. Let's see what happened. They brought him over to Southern. I'm not sure. Let's see what happened here.
Strong evidence that he had pretty darn good corroboration. But the kind of crimes that he committed, you know, you could see the jury almost getting ready to faint or vomit. Literally, he was a butcher that they used to chop bodies,
right?
And he liked doing it, and that came across in his testimony. No, you have situations like that. You don't know how a witness is going to perform when he gets on the witness stand. Sometimes they're great when you prepare them and they fall apart on the witness stand. Sometimes they're terrible, like a performance. They're terrible in preparation. They go on the witness stand, they surprise the hell out of you. So, sometimes you ask for something, you get it, and you probably would have been better if you'd been more disciplined about it.
It's rare that the mob would win against Rudy Giuliani's Southern District. But you did, Michael. You won. And you actually do attribute it to Iorizzo coming over. What did you guys do when he got on the stand?
I wanted to build a legacy that I was proud of. I wanted to help other people along.
I'll tell you what happened. You know, because again, I was kind of stunned at being indicted in this case, but then I understood when I saw some of the evidence come out. When Iorizzo took the stand, I'm saying, what is he going to say? He doesn't know anything about this, nothing at all. And he got on there, and he didn't do well, and we tore him up. And I think what happened, as a matter of fact, I'm almost positive, is that He went back to the Eastern District. He was going to be the main witness in this whole gasoline tax case against me. And the Eastern District was so upset with him that we beat him on the prior case that they were ready to throw him out of the witness protection program. And I know that because he was sending word back to his son. He actually, Rudy, you're not going to believe this. He actually wanted me to help him escape, that he was making an appearance in the Eastern District. He was setting it
This
up.
is before he testified?
No, this was after. After.
Oh.
He wanted me to help him escape so that he wouldn't have to, continue in this thing with me. And I think the only reason that the Eastern District gave me a deal was because we tarnished their main witness against me. He was the guy. And now they were afraid that if they took me to trial, that we would beat him again. And then they gave me that deal for 10 years.
If Iriza doesn't come over to the Southern District, Michael, do you think you get convicted?
Well, they wouldn't. I don't think they would give me the deal that they gave me. Believe it or not, 10 years was like, the greatest deal in the world. And I had a $15 million fine and restitution. But still, with the amount of time that guys were getting back then, that was a real deal to get 10 years. And that was under the old law. So we still had parole, even though nobody really made it. We had it. But I don't think they would have given me that deal. They would have taken me to trial without a doubt. And then who knows, if I would have won or lost. There was another battle.
In America, it's called La Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours. In Italy, it's called the Mafia. We're talking about the mob, a former capo regime of the Colombo crime family, Michael Franzese. Go to michaelfranzese.com. Of course, the former U.S. Attorney, Southern District, former Associate Attorney General. Also, of course, America's Mayor, Rudy Giuliani, joins us too. Rudy'sCommonSense.com. Go there. Rudy, you sound like you're all business. Go ahead.
I want to mention one thing. I want to tell you how effective these tapes were. We were on trial for several weeks. I had, it was me and Jimmy Rotunda were the main, the two main defendants. And then we had 15 co-defendants. Half of them I didn't know. I hadn't met them. But there was one guy that was a union guy. And I'll never forget, I forget his name now, but he was a nice guy. I had never met him before. But they mentioned him, and what you're doing here is a crime. If this place is bugged,
I'm somebody, I want to clean up the streets. I love my city, so on. Michael, it was more personal for you guys. I've actually talked to you about this.
What you're doing here is he gets convicted. He got convicted, and he got 7 years as a result of that one 10-minute tape. That was it.
Scot-free the entire time. It's Michael Franzese and Rudy Giuliani. I have to ask you, Rudy, you sound like you're all business. I want to convict these guys. I'm somebody, I want to clean up the streets. I love my city, so on. Michael, it was more personal for you guys. I've actually talked to you about this because the mob, they just get rid of you if you're a problem. Was there any talk of getting rid of Rudy Giuliani back in the day?
Yes, there was.
Okay. We're going to go to this now. We're going to go to another part now where they pick it up. Was there talk of getting rid of Rudy Giuliani from the mob? Let's see what happens now. I'm going to go to part 2. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I'm adding some tidbits here and there. It may be valuable. It may not be. Just my opinion, observations, and thought. Let's go to the next side of this. Let me share this again. Share the screen. Let's get into this a little bit. Chrome tab. Here we go. Share it. See if we're here. Moving along.
Cheating, right?
No, I mean, look, who knows what we were thinking at that time. You know, we're always right and everybody else is wrong. That's how we thought it back then, especially law enforcement. But no, it was hands off no matter what. Even if we felt we were being framed, you weren't allowed to go after law enforcement. There was an exception. There was 2 exceptions that I was aware of. One of them was Rudy. He was number 1 on the list, and there was a lot of talk about that. And then secondly was Geraldo Rivera. Believe it or not, people didn't like him. And there was talk about eliminating him.
Rudy, he just rubbed people the wrong way. I get Rudy. Not that I wanted it to happen. Thank God it didn't. But why Geraldo?
Nobody liked him. You know, he had just gone after the mob at certain times, and things that he said, you know, probably rubbed one person in particular wrong. Who knows? But the word was kind of out on him. But it was a definite thing with Rudy, and I had mentioned this before. Rudy, you probably know this.
Rudy, you knew there was a hit on your head?
I know about it because there was one meeting of the commission in which a couple of days after I got notified by the FBI that I might need protection. I didn't have protection then, but I might need protection. And I said, why? I had had a contract from the Sicilian Mafia when I first became U.S. Attorney, because of the Pisa connection case. Oh. And we found the people and we resolved it. But then they came to me one day and they said, you're going to have to listen to these tapes. And the tapes were conversations that Fat Tony, Carmine Persico, maybe Castellano, they had the conversation after the meeting, because we didn't actually tape the meeting. We taped them having conversations about the meeting after it was over. And they talked about having gone to a vote about killing me. And they voted 3-2. And Carmine Persico voted not to kill me.
Wow.
And Fat Tony. I don't know about the rest, but I had the 2 of them. So when I prosecuted Persico, we put him in jail for 100 years with the rest of them. With Fat Tony, he was kind of okay with that. But then, you know, we prosecuted them again because there's a theory under RICO that they're not only.
Did you hear that? He was okay taking 100 years. They got him fair and square, I guess, and he was okay with taking 100 years. So he was ready to do the time, die in prison for a life that he chose to live. That's how you're supposed to go down.
On the commission, and that's a business enterprise. But then they run their own family, which is another business.
Right.
So we prosecuted him again with all of his capo regimes and soldiers, and about 20 people in the case. And he was so upset that he was getting prosecuted again. He was really pissed off. I mean, really, really upset. How can this guy do this? I'm already going for 100 years. What am I going to go for 200 years? He just wants me around to torture me. And one day, he tells somebody, he offers him $200,000 to kill me, which I always knew was temper. But the FBI took it seriously. The FBI came to me and said, you know what? He used to be called behind his back Carmine the Snake. They wouldn't call him the Snake in front of him. They said, you know what the Snake did? He was over in the prison. He put out $200,000 to kill you. I said, pull. He said, no, this is serious. He's a crazy guy. I said, not that crazy. They said, no, we got to protect you. So they actually started getting all of his conversations from prison. And he was basically having a temper tantrum that it just wasn't fair. That it was, and he even was using a good legal theory, which is they already have me convicted, and they're using me to prejudice the case against everybody else.
Right.
Well, you're damn right we were. Exactly
that was the job, though, right? That was the job. It's Rudy Giuliani. That was
the issue on appeal. We almost lost the case on that issue. We finally won it. But sure, it was a much. All I brought in were now all the little guys, right? Well, and I didn't bring in the boss.
Right.
It just becomes a different kind of case in front of the jury emotionally. So he was being misused. Fat Tony was very upset about that. But Fat Tony lost his temper and threatened the judge and apologized.
Well, that's kind of a dumb move. That's kind of a dumb move. Now, by the way, as much as they didn't call Persico the snake to his face, I don't think they called Fat Tony to his face. In fact, Michael, I asked you that once. You said no. We didn't call him Fat Tony to his face. But the bottom line is, it was serious business. I mean, by one vote, Rudy, they didn't vote to kill you. I mean, does that work in your brain at all, or did you just blow it off and do the job?
I always agreed with Michael. I thought they would get angry. They might sometimes say it. They might sometimes even vote it, but they wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
It would have been too catastrophic to do.
Well, too risky, too high profile. That was it. Yeah.
They had always gotten through because they were restrained and careful. I mean, some of the famous mafia hits were people that they thought were going to cause them trouble. You know, people who would come out of jail, they thought they'd be too wild and too. I mean, that's why what Gotti did was completely inconsistent with the sort of history of the mafia, to go get attention for yourself.
Right.
Even Bonanno just did it when he got old and was Dottie. Bonanno used to pretend to be some kind of businessman. People in his neighborhood thought of him as a nice old man, a nice guy. The people in Arizona loved him. When I went into the hospital to question him and have a hearing with him, the nuns were terrible to me in the hospital. Why are you going after this nice man?
Wow, can you imagine?
He built a hospital for us. He never did anything wrong in Arizona. Well, if he did it in New York, he left New York. The nuns were fighting with me.
That's crazy. It is Rudy Giuliani, Rudy's Common Sense. Get to that website, rudyscommonsense.com. Michael Franzese, michaelfranzese.com. It's an historic sit-down, and I appreciate you guys doing it. I want to fast forward because I know everybody's busy, but I want to get as much in as I possibly can. Michael, when you finally were sentenced, it was 10 years. But you had the change of heart and the change of soul, basically, because of something that a prison guard did.
Okay. Change of heart, he found God, I'm assuming, right? But he testified. Does he say it in here? Let's continue. Let's see what he says. He cooperated. He testified against people. I don't care if who we testified against went to prison or not for one day. You still gave information. Makes you a stool pigeon. You're a cooperator. Do you not say? I've yet to hear Michael Franzese say that he cooperated. Change of heart. Let's see what he says here.
When he saw that you were like on the brink, like you didn't even want to live anymore, right?
Yeah, well, what happened, I did 5 years on that case. I came out, I was home for about, I think, 13 months, and then I violated my parole. They put me back in, and, they're bringing other cases up, and you're never going to see the street again. They told my wife the same thing. So, that first night, they kept me in lockdown for almost 3 years, but that first night was probably the worst night of my life to that point. And, I was laying there, it's hard to describe the feeling when you think that, at 39 years old, 40 years old, whatever I was, that's it. A 6x8 cell is the rest of your life. You're separated from your loved ones. This is the way to live, and I was depressed. There's no question about it. And the prison guard had walked by my cell. He looked in on me and he said, "Franzese, you don't look good. Are you okay?" And I chased him. I said, "Look, get away from me, man. I don't want to see any of you guys tonight." And he came back, about a minute later and pushed the Bible through the slot on the door. And, honestly, Joe, I spent 29 months and 7 days in the hole. And that was the time when, if you call this a transformation, when, I really started to study the Bible. I had my wife send me in, several, I can't even imagine, hundreds of books, about my faith and every other faith. Because, thanks to Rudy and people out there, I was very in tune with evidence.
There are men in prison that transform within the prison walls. They transform. They get in touch with their soul. They get in touch with Jesus Christ. They change their mind. They change their brains. But they stay in their prison cell until the day they die or to finish out their sentence. Their change of heart gives them the ability to cope. It's supposed to give you the ability to cope, not the ability to go testify. Let's see what he says about this.
Evidence was a major part of my life. I'm always trying to find evidence, usually to acquit myself. And so I was really into the evidence that supported, biblical truths. And I was convinced during that time, that the Bible is the way to go. And that's when my transformation as a Christian really took hold through that 3 years.
And as that happened, Michael, were you in prison after Rudy was already the mayor or before he was the mayor?
It was after. He had become the mayor while I was there. And
you tell a story about going back to New York, and you asked the feds or whoever it was that was driving you around to take you through part of the city that you hadn't seen in a while. Would you mind telling that story with Rudy here?
yeah, I'll tell you what happened. It was 1991. I had done 5 years in prison. I was out for.
Now you can like Rudy. I gotta be honest with you. You can like Rudy. You can hate Rudy. I don't care whatever. He explained his job in totality, every aspect of it, positive, negative. He explained what he did. Michael omits one part about all of this, that the change of heart means he cooperated. That's all the change of heart is. Finding Jesus, God bless you. All right, but Rudy left nothing unanswered, added more to his questions. He did not have to say his father was a criminal, and he did. Michael never mentions that he cooperated. Only he mentioned that he found God and had a change of heart.
13 months, then they violated me, and they picked me up in California, drove me into New York, and I was with the marshals, and I said, "Hey, what time do I have to, see the judge?" And they're nice guys, the marshals are cool, and they said, "We got a couple hours." I said, "Hey, do me a favor. I haven't had, a cup of coffee from, I can't think of the coffee place. I'm losing my head. But anyway, I said, I haven't had this coffee, and why don't you drive me around the city? I haven't been here in a while. I want to see what it looks like. So they said, sure. Oh, it was Dunkin' Donuts. So we went to Dunkin' Donuts, and then we drove around Manhattan, and we went down to Times Square, and I could not believe it. I said, this isn't where I grew up. This city has been reformed. It's been rejuvenated. And, it was all about Mayor Giuliani. He did the job. And I was shocked, Rudy, honestly. I had never seen it like that from the time I was a kid. And the job that you did, I said, man, this is, I was very impressed with it. And then, of course, 2001 came about. And, you may not understand this, but a lot of mob guys, we may have been criminals, but we were still patriots. A lot of guys went to war. They fought for their country. We didn't want to see our country go down the drain. Trust me, a lot of us felt that way. And, what you did for the city, I really appreciated it. I have daughters that live there, and, I still have family there, and it was great to see it like that. And then, of course, 2001, I think everybody from New York appreciated the job you did at that point. I mean, my daughter was working, just a short distance away from the towers when they went down. And I hadn't heard from her because communication was shut off. I was a nervous wreck. I was out in California. I was a nervous wreck for some 12 months.
And getting into college or getting into school that happened with Nicky Barnes and most of them did have another life. Nicky Barnes was on the front, which I'm an African-American drug dealer. He was on the front page of the New York Times as the top guy in Harlem. He wasn't the top guy in Harlem. But Jimmy Carter saw it. I wasn't the U.S. attorney. Then he called the U.S. attorney, and they got to get him.
That's it. Get him.
Now, all of a sudden, you got these prosecutors getting pushed by the president of the United States to go after this guy, whereas he could have operated for 30 years and nobody would have cared who he was. The old guys understood that. Most of the old names we mentioned, maybe Joe Colombo was an exception to that. Joey Gallo was an exception to that. There were a couple of people who were exceptions, but most of them pretended to be in another life, and most of them did have another life.
Michael, I got to ask Michael about that. Is that Michael? Are mobsters regular guys who just also do some crime on the side? I mean, the same problems with the wife and how are we going to make the mortgage or who's going to college? I mean, is that really? Are you guys just regular guys, and then you do some other stuff that we wouldn't do?
Well, I think what Rudy said was very accurate. Joe, there were guys on the street that seemed to enjoy, doing the heavy work. Guys like, I can mention them because they're gone and they're well-known people. I'm not saying anything out of school, but guys like Roy DeMeo and Nikki Black and guys like that who just seem to enjoy the kind of work that, most of us, hey, if we had to do something, we were told to do it, we do it. That was it. But we didn't get into we didn't enjoy doing that stuff. We weren't there for that reason. And I think a lot of guys were like that. Most of the guys were like that. And then what Rudy said was correct. The Joe Colombos, Joey Gallos, Carmine Galante, John Gotti, guys like that were so high profile, they were not spoken well of because they brought heat on everybody else. I mean, I remember walking the picket line you know, that Joe Colombo organized with the Italian American Civil Rights League. We were on 69th Street and 3rd Avenue, and we were walking that picket line every day. And made guys, I wasn't made at that time, I was a recruit, but made guys were walking the line cursing Joe Colombo. Said, they're taking photos of us. These people don't even know who we are. Now we're going to be on blast with the FBI. Everybody's going to know who we are. They were very, very upset about it. You know, so you don't want that kind of an attention. And even myself, you know, I think my attention came because, you know, I made a lot of money and I had a jet plane and all that. And of course I had the name. I mean, my father was extremely high profile in the 60s, so it fell on me. But, you know, and that didn't do anybody any good either. So, you know, the lower profile that you are, the less people know you in that.
Hoover is, instead of listen to their conversations about baseball, little tiny television cameras about this big, over 30 years of pursuing communism. And one of the great criticisms of Hoover is, instead of going after the mob, he went after communism. Well, I'm not sure he didn't pick the right priority, but in any event, those guys who went after the communists, they were burglars. I mean, they were robbers. They were second-story men. They were as good or better than the guys who did it for a living on the street. They would know how to get into your house, leave no trace of it. Oh my God. In the case of Matty, we made his office a television studio. This is way back in the 80s. With tiny television cameras about this big. Wow. That were hidden. And then the rest of them, we would put microphones in. In fact, Tony's social club, we had 18 microphones. It was like a studio.
That's crazy.
I mean, we could listen to their conversations about baseball, about gambling. Now you have to minimize. What that means is I have to be really careful. So let's say if I were to have Michael back then on tape, if he were to call his wife, and I find out, and I realize in that first conversation that his wife is not involved. He calls her up, he says, "I'll be home for dinner, honey," and she says, "Oh, the kids aren't doing well." I have to put in a note saying the minute he calls his wife, we got to cut it off. Wow. Now, if I don't do that,
blow the case. Yeah.
His lawyer can get the entire tape, the entire thing. This could be a $3 million investment of 8 months of tapes. Whole thing gets thrown out. So we were very, very disciplined about that. And some of those conversations you really wanted to listen to because they were interesting. It was like watching a movie.
It's sort of like a soap opera.
My kids, I didn't do this.
Right.
My kids did it. They were just young kids. And they would, you know, somebody's having an argument with his wife or his girlfriend, or he's got a girlfriend and a wife and he's keeping them separate. The guy wants to figure out, are they going to find out about each other?
You got to hear the resolution. You don't get to hear the resolution.
Wow, it's like they're watching a movie, so I would have to go in and give them a lecture and explain to them, we are not watching a movie. Right. This is for real, guys.
And by the way, by law, if you're not investigating the wife, you have to shut it off because she's not the one who you have the warrant for.
The doctor, this one, that one. And here's the tough one. When you find out they're going to kill somebody, you find out we're going to whack this guy.
Wow.
What do you do? Do you stop it and jeopardize the wire? Do you arrest him? Do you warn the guy? So basically, it only happened to us 3 times. We warned the person and took a risk.
And did that warning become turn them into a witness? Did that become part of the because there's no way they could stay in the street? They're going to be killed. I mean,
only in one case. The other 2 guys just accepted it, went on, did what they did. They went away for a while, came back. The third.
You see, the 2 guys knew that was part of their life. No surprise to them. I don't know who the other one was that turned into a witness. Let's see what he says.
Guy turned.
I want to finish it here, guys. It's Rudy Giuliani, America's Mayor, rudyscommonsense.com, Michael Franzese, michaelfranzese.com, become part of his crew. I want to end it with this last question for both of you, and it's the same question, basically. And it's a 2-part. Did you ever think almost 40 years later you would sit there and have a conversation like this? And how has your opinion of the guy you're talking with right now, not me, obviously, how has that changed over the years? Michael, I want to start with you, if you don't mind.
No, I would have never believed that this would happen. But I'm thrilled that it happened. I really am. And look, you know, I am so thankful in life that my perspective has changed. You know, I grew up with this distorted sense of view where, you know, good was bad, bad was good. And that was as a result of my upbringing and seeing what my dad went through and my family. but I came to realize later on, it's like I had this conversation with my dad, and I'll get through it quickly. My dad was always angry. He never would take responsibility for what went down in our family as a result of him being involved in the life. We had a rough time. My sister died of drugs. My brother became an informant, 25-year drug addict. My mother and him, a horrible relationship in the end. And he used to say to me, Mike, I was framed. If I wasn't framed and went to prison, none of this would have happened. I said, Dad, I know that. But even if you were framed, which I don't agree with, you weren't framed for being a doctor, a lawyer, or a priest. You were a straight criminal guy. This is what we did. We understood, the pitfalls of that life. So my perspective has changed, and I can look at people differently. Just want to say this, I recently had a pretty heated discussion with a former mob guy, I'm not going to mention his name, over Joe Pistone. He got upset that I interviewed Joe, and I've been knowing Joe. Yeah, I've been knowing Joe for 15, 18 years now. We've been on panels together. I really happen to like him.
Brasco, right? Just for those who are watching, Donnie Brasco.
Donnie Brasco. Fortunately, I only met him once when we were in the street. Never did anything with him then. But I said to the guy, I said, what are you upset about? I said, he was he was law enforcement. He did his job better than we did our job. He was able to stay undercover for 6 years while we fell asleep, maybe trying to make a buck with this guy or doing whatever. I said, why are you mad at him? That was his job. You can't get mad at him. He did his job. And the guy couldn't understand that mentality. And, I feel the same way now. Guys did their job. They were on the other side. I'll be honest with you, too. My father taught me. He said, you don't disrespect law enforcement. When you go to prison, you don't be a jerk with the guards. You be respectful to everybody. Hopefully you get the same respect back. And, you just fight them the way you have to fight them. And so I think, Rudy, I was looking forward to this. I really mean it. I respect a lot of it. I mean it. I respect, a lot of the things that you've done over the years. Even up until recently, which we don't have to get into, I have a lot of respect for what you did. And so that's a whole nother hour.
For the next interview, that's another hour later down the line if we can. So there's a matter of respect now. I mean, you saw what he did with the city. You see what he's done ever since. And your perspective is the guy did his job really, really well. So how can you not respect that?
Absolutely.
Rudy, your thoughts 37 years later? Have you given much thought to Michael? Do you believe him that he's a new guy?
I do. But even before this. So, I'm very happy that we've had this conversation. And really, I have to tell you, it confirms what I sort of decided 10, 12 years ago, just in reading and thinking about Michael and talking to friends about him. It was clear to me that what at the time, I kind of had an instinct, I don't know why, that what he was talking about originally was more legitimate than most people.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure. And then I've watched him develop. I've watched him on television. I've read a lot of the things that he's written, and I was very happy about it because I think that this is what can happen to human beings, no matter how. This is what I believe as a Christian, as a Catholic, that you can change, you can turn. Not everybody. I believe this about drug addicts. I have friends that were very bad drug addicts a while back, and I have friends who died of drug addiction. So
this was a really good.
The human personality is endlessly fascinating, and God has different directions for us. And I think the direction for Michael is he can be so helpful to other people, not necessarily even people in the mob, but people who have done things wrong in their life, and they have to figure out how to turn it around. And the minute you asked if I would do this, I said yes, right?
You did, yeah.
I was looking forward to meeting Michael and to seeing him, and I hope we get to do it in person, Michael.
That would be awesome. Actually, we have to set up the actual sit-down after COVID and all that. You guys would be down for that, right?
We'd have to use an Italian restaurant.
It would have to be an Italian restaurant.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Michael.
No, I said absolutely. I would welcome that. Look forward to it, Rudy. Definitely.
It is Michael Franzese.
All right. Well, I'm stopping that screen. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully this loads. Everybody has different opinions on it. Not once does Michael say, he says his transformation was due to the Bible being slipped under his jail cell. Not once is it mentioned about cooperation. His change in life is due to cooperation. Not just due to being a Christian, because there's Christian men in prison that go their whole lives being a Christian behind the cage. So, I don't know. Let's see. I'm going to upload this. Hopefully it goes through. We'll see how it goes. I'll be in the chat live. This is a pre-record. Tommy Sticks, check it out. Ciao, friends.